Hello friends, I'm glad to see you on my Swiss Chronicles channel. Enjoy watching.
Isabel Green had always prided herself on being a devoted wife, a woman who found purpose in building a life of love, loyalty, and partnership with the man she adored. But love, she was beginning to realize, was a fragile thing. It was like glass, crystal clear and capable of reflecting light beautifully, until one day, it shatters. It was a crisp November morning when Isabel felt the first crack. She was arranging lilies in the dining room, carefully adjusting each stem, trying to make sure the bouquet looked perfect. But as her husband Oliver drifted down the stairs, she caught a glimpse of his indifferent gaze. He barely looked at her, walking past the flowers she had arranged so carefully, without a word. He grabbed his coffee, muttering about how he was running late, as always. "Will you be home for dinner tonight?" Isabel asked, her voice soft with an almost desperate hope. Oliver paused, checked his watch, and replied dismissively, "Not sure. Long day ahead. Don't wait up." With that, he was gone, and the door clicked shut behind him, leaving her alone with the silence that had settled into every corner of their home. Isabel let out a long breath, her fingers tracing the smooth petals of a lily. She couldn't help but notice that her husband had started avoiding her more and more, his time at home reduced to fleeting moments marked by impatience or silence. It was as though she had become invisible. Days passed, but Isabel couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in her gut. Oliver's dismissiveness, his tendency to spend long hours at work, and the vague excuses about late meetings, everything seemed off. She couldn't remember the last time he looked at her with warmth, let alone the love they used to share. It was a quiet desperation that settled over her, creeping in and taking root, day by day. One evening, her closest friend, Clara, visited. Clara had always been Isabel's confidant, someone who knew her well enough to see through her smiles. As they sat over cups of tea, Clara noticed the distant look in Isabel's eyes. "You seem worried, Belle. What's on your mind?" Clara asked, her voice soft but probing. Isabel hesitated, then spoke. "It's Oliver. He's different lately. Distant. And he's always at work, always somewhere else." Clara reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on Isabel's. "Have you talked to him about it? Every time I try, he shuts me down. Makes me feel like I'm imagining things," Isabel whispered, her voice thick with frustration and sadness. "I don't know what's real anymore, Clara." Clara was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "If it's hurting you this much, maybe it's time to get some clarity. You deserve to know the truth, Belle." Isabel sat back, taken aback by her friend's bluntness. She knew what Clara was suggesting, though it terrified her. The idea of prying into Oliver's life, hiring someone to investigate, felt like crossing a line she wasn't sure she wanted to cross. Yet, the constant ache in her heart told her that perhaps this was the only way to find peace. As the days passed, the sense of foreboding didn't fade. Instead, it grew, looming over her like a storm cloud. Finally, after a long night of staring at the ceiling, Isabel made up her mind. She took out her phone and looked up a private investigator, someone she'd heard about through a distant acquaintance. His name was Nathan Fields, and he was known for his discretion and thoroughness. The next day, she met Nathan at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. He was calm, professional, with a quiet intensity in his eyes. "I don't normally do this sort of thing," Isabel said, her voice barely above a whisper as she stirred her coffee. Nathan nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. "Most people don't. But sometimes you need answers. I'll help you find them." As he spoke, Isabel felt a weight lifting, as though just taking this step, no matter how painful, was beginning to bring her some peace. Nathan outlined the process. He would track Oliver's movements, observe his behavior, and gather any evidence he found, providing her with updates along the way. With a heavy heart, Isabel agreed, and thus began her journey toward uncovering the truth about the man she had once trusted with her whole heart. Certainly, here's the next part of Isabel's story. Days turned into weeks, and Isabel found herself bracing for each update from Nathan. Every message he sent was like a ripple through her life, bringing with it an unsettling truth that her heart already suspected. She tried to keep her mind off the investigation, immersing herself in work and taking up old hobbies she had once loved, like painting. But each stroke of the brush felt hollow, her thoughts always wandering back to Oliver and what secrets he might be hiding. One evening, Isabel received a text from Nathan. "Meet me at the cafe tomorrow morning. There's something you need to see." Her heart clenched. She spent the rest of the night staring at the clock, imagining every possible outcome. Sleep was a distant hope, and when dawn finally broke, Isabel found herself feeling as though she were stepping into another life. At the cafe, Nathan sat waiting, a small manila envelope resting on the table between them. When she approached, he greeted her with a nod, his expression unreadable. "Isabel," he said softly, motioning for her to sit. "This isn't easy, but I believe in being straightforward with my clients." Isabel swallowed, feeling a chill run through her. Her fingers twitched as she reached for the envelope. Inside were several photographs, all showing Oliver with a young woman, dark-haired, petite and beautiful. In one photo, they were sitting in a park, talking with an intimacy that Isabel hadn't shared with him in years. Another showed them at a restaurant, Oliver leaning close to her, his hand resting on hers. "I've confirmed that her name is Elise," Nathan said, his voice low. "She works as an interior designer in the city, and she and Oliver seem to be quite close." Isabel felt a rush of nausea. She stared at the pictures, unable to look away from the man she had shared her life with, now sharing himself with someone else. Her fingers went numb, and she struggled to process it all. "I'm so sorry," Nathan said gently, watching her with concern. "I can continue the investigation if you need more evidence, but from what I've seen, I think you have enough." Isabel barely heard him. Her mind was elsewhere, spiraling into memories of their life together, their first date, their wedding, the late nights they'd spent talking about their dreams and fears. The warmth she had once felt for him was now poisoned by the bitterness of betrayal. Taking a deep breath, Isabel managed to look up. "Thank you, Nathan. I need some time to process this." Nathan nodded, offering a sympathetic look. "Of course. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call." She left the cafe feeling like she was floating, disconnected from reality. She wandered through the city streets, unsure where she was headed, the photographs weighing heavily in her purse. Everything felt surreal, as though she were a stranger in her own life. When she finally arrived home, she sat down in the quiet of her living room, the silence pressing in on her like a vice. For hours she sat there, staring at the walls, letting the shock settle. Eventually, her eyes landed on an old journal she had kept when she and Oliver were first married. She picked it up, flipping through its pages, reading the words of a younger version of herself, one filled with hope, love, and dreams. As the evening darkened into night, Isabel began to feel a strange sense of clarity. She knew that she couldn't stay trapped in the past, held hostage by a man who had forgotten what they once shared. She needed to break free, to rediscover herself beyond the confines of this marriage. Her decision didn't come easily, but it came with a certainty she couldn't ignore. The next morning, she called a lawyer to inquire about filing for divorce, feeling the first glimmer of hope she'd felt in a long time. It was time to start a new chapter. A few days later, Isabel received a call from an unexpected number. When she picked up, she heard a familiar voice, one she hadn't heard in years. "Belle, it's me, Theo." She froze, memories flooding back. Theo had been her college boyfriend, a kind-hearted artist who always knew how to make her laugh. They had parted ways amicably when life took them in different directions, but she had often thought of him fondly, wondering what might have been. "Theo," she said, a smile tugging at her lips despite herself. "It's been ages. How are you?" They spoke for nearly an hour, reminiscing about old times and catching up on each other's lives. Theo told her about his art studio, his recent travels, and the small gallery he'd opened in the city. For the first time in weeks, Isabel felt like herself again, as though a part of her long buried had come back to life. Before they ended the call, Theo hesitated. "Would you want to meet up sometime? Maybe grab coffee or something." "I'd love to see you, Belle." Isabel felt a flutter in her chest, a sensation she hadn't felt in years. She agreed, and they set a time for the following weekend. The days that followed were filled with small but profound changes. Isabel began attending art classes again, immersing herself in the creative outlets she had once cherished. She spent hours painting, her brushstrokes reflecting the emotions that had been buried beneath years of complacency. When she met Theo that weekend, she felt as though she were meeting a part of herself that had been long lost. They spent the afternoon laughing, talking, and sharing stories from their past. Theo was as warm and genuine as she remembered, and he made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. As they walked through the city, Theo turned to her with a gentle smile. "You know, Belle, you're stronger than you think. I can see it in you. Don't let anyone take that away." His words echoed in her mind long after they parted ways. She realized that for the first time, she was beginning to reclaim her life, not just as Oliver's wife or a woman scorned, but as Isabel, an artist, a friend, and a woman with her own dreams. Each day brought new challenges, but Isabel found herself embracing them. She poured herself into her art, connecting with other women in her community, and even hosting small gatherings where they could share their own stories of resilience. She felt a sense of purpose, one that was no longer tied to a relationship but rooted in her own strength and compassion. The day she finally signed the divorce papers, Isabel felt a bittersweet sense of closure. She knew the journey ahead would not be easy, but she was ready to face it with courage. As she walked away from the courthouse, she felt a lightness she hadn't felt in years, as though the weight of her past had finally lifted. That evening, Isabel stood in front of a blank canvas in her small art studio, the cool evening air drifting through the open window. She took a deep breath, picked up her brush, and began to paint, not for anyone else, but for herself. Her strokes were bold, vibrant, filled with the colors of renewal and hope. Each line she painted felt like a step toward reclaiming her life, her identity, and her happiness. And as she worked, she knew that this was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, Isabel continued to explore her creativity, reconnecting with Theo, and building a life that felt like her own. She knew there would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, but she was ready to face them. Through her own eyes, Isabel had finally begun to see herself clearly, a woman who had once been broken, now whole and stronger than ever. Certainly. Here's the next segment of Isabel's story, where she continues to grow, deepen her bond with Theo, and fully embrace her new path. In the following months, Isabel threw herself into her work and new life. Her paintings grew in both complexity and emotion, each one an expression of the strength she had found within herself. People began to take notice of her art, and to her surprise, local galleries started showing interest in displaying her pieces. This attention felt surreal. Once, she had only painted for herself, but now her work was speaking to others who saw pieces of their own stories within her brushstrokes. One evening, as Isabel was packing up her supplies in her studio, her phone rang. Theo's name appeared on the screen, and she felt a familiar warmth spread through her. They had kept in touch since reconnecting, their friendship blossoming naturally. But there was something deeper between them now, a gentle yet undeniable connection that grew stronger with each conversation, each shared laugh. "Hi, Theo," she answered, smiling as she leaned against the wall, cradling the phone close. "Belle?" he began, his voice carrying a hint of excitement. "I have some news. The gallery wants to feature a new exhibit next month, and I suggested your work. They loved it. They want to give you a solo exhibit." For a moment, Isabel was speechless. She had dreamed of this but never thought it would happen so quickly. "A solo exhibit?" she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "Just, they think your art is powerful, that it'll resonate with people." Theo's voice softened. "You've come so far, Belle. You deserve this." Her eyes filled with tears of gratitude and disbelief. She realized that she had been so focused on healing and rebuilding herself that she hadn't stopped to acknowledge just how far she had come. "Thank you, Theo. This means the world to me. It's not just me, Isabel. You've earned this. I'm just happy I could help." He paused, a smile evident in his tone. "I'll be there with you, every step of the way." In the weeks leading up to the exhibit, Isabel worked tirelessly, filling her canvases with pieces of her journey. Each painting reflected a part of her transformation, the agony of betrayal, the pain of letting go, the strength of self-discovery, and the quiet joy of renewal. The exhibit quickly took shape, and Theo helped her arrange each piece, his unwavering support making every moment more meaningful. On the night of the opening, Isabel stood in the center of the gallery, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress that Theo had helped her choose. She felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness as people began arriving. Friends, art enthusiasts, and even a few strangers gathered, admiring her work and commenting on its depth and emotion. As the crowd moved through the gallery, Isabel caught snippets of conversations, people sharing how her art resonated with them. She heard someone remark on the resilience and vulnerability in her pieces, and another person mentioned how they saw reflections of their own heartbreak in her work. For the first time, Isabel felt that her art had truly connected her to others in a way she had never anticipated. And then, as she glanced toward the entrance, she saw Theo standing there, watching her with a gentle smile. He approached her, holding out a small bouquet of wildflowers. "For you," he said softly, handing her the bouquet. "I couldn't be prouder of you, Isabel." She took the flowers, her heart swelling with gratitude and affection. "Thank you, Theo. I don't think I could have done this without you." He shook his head. "You had this in you all along, Belle. I just gave you a little nudge." They stood there, wrapped in a comfortable silence, watching the guests move through the gallery. Eventually, Isabel turned to him, her eyes shining. "This has been a dream come true, Theo. But it feels like only the beginning." After the exhibit, Isabel found herself inspired to continue creating, her art evolving as she embraced new themes: freedom, self-worth, and love. The experience gave her a newfound confidence, one that went beyond her art and extended to every corner of her life. One evening, Theo invited her to his studio, wanting to share some of his own work with her. She had always admired his art, the way his paintings captured raw emotion and delicate beauty. As she walked through his studio, she felt a deep appreciation for his creative process, the way he poured his heart into his work. As they looked over his latest pieces, Theo turned to her, his eyes softening. "You know, Isabel, these past months have been some of the happiest of my life. You've brought so much light back into my world." Isabel looked at him, her heart fluttering. She realized that Theo had been her anchor, helping her find her way back to herself. He had seen her at her most vulnerable and lifted her up without expecting anything in return. And now, standing there with him, she felt a deep, undeniable love that went beyond friendship. "I feel the same way," she whispered, taking his hand. "You've given me so much, Theo. More than you know." He squeezed her hand, his gaze unwavering. "I want to be by your side, to share my life with you. Not just as a friend, but as something more." Isabel's heart skipped a beat, and she felt a rush of warmth and happiness that she hadn't felt in years. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears of joy. "I'd like that, Theo. I'd like that very much." As the seasons changed, Isabel and Theo's relationship blossomed, each day bringing them closer together. They traveled, painted, and spent quiet evenings together, finding peace and happiness in each other's presence. Isabel felt like she was living a life she had once only dreamed of, one filled with love, creativity, and a deep sense of belonging. Her art continued to gain recognition, and she eventually launched a small gallery of her own, a space dedicated to showcasing emerging artists and sharing stories of resilience and transformation. She poured her heart into her work, inspired by the belief that art had the power to heal and connect. One evening, as Isabel closed up the gallery, she looked out at the city skyline, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. Her journey had been painful and uncertain, but it had brought her to a place of strength and fulfillment she hadn't known was possible. With Theo by her side and a future filled with promise, Isabel knew she was finally where she was meant to be. And as she locked the door to her gallery and walked hand in hand with Theo into the night, she felt a joy that ran deep, a quiet certainty that she had reclaimed her life and found true happiness. Through her own eyes, she had seen her life transformed, and in the process, she had rediscovered herself.